Yep.
Hello, and welcome to the first of hopefully many profiles, human design profiles. Fabrice and I are going to look at famous people and their profiles and kind of like dive in and use looking at different people's profiles as a way to learn more about this really interesting typology system, human design, and validate it and kind of test it out and like, can we really see from someone's design? Can we really see what they're like? And so let's actually test this out. Let's look at it. Let's look at different people's profiles and just like really investigate this system more. So we are starting off this first episode by looking at the profile of a dictator. And we're actually going to look at a number of different dictators and dictatorships that have happened and that are out there, and particularly wanting to look at Putin right now, because there's conflict happening in the world, and it's quite an interesting character to investigate a bit more. So we've been quite fascinated to see that a lot of dictators have something very interesting in common, and some of them have there's definitely themes that run all the way through. So we're going to just kind of investigate some of that and see where we end up and what that goes. So hey, Fabrice, welcome, and yeah, you wanna take us in?
Yeah, let's get to it. I'm gonna share the screen now. And so today, dictator by design, fear and anger manifested. And you're gonna understand soon why I use those two words. Fear being extremely connected to the spleen, and anger being connected, of course, to the manifestor. And you're gonna see that it's just a common trait that we find in all of them.
As I can also attest, being a manifestor, anger is definitely something that lives inside of me.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. Especially if things don't go your way, and they know how to use that anger.
Yeah, I'm a very gentle kind of anger personally, but I think some of these characters we're going to look at weren't.
Yes.
Or are. Sure. Yeah.
Well, the first, slide here, I wanted to show the very obvious similarities in profiles between, two of the most famous dictators and Putin. We have here Hitler on the left. In the center, we have Mao Zedong, and here we have Putin. And the first super obvious thing is, okay, they're all manifestors, first of all, but not just all manifestors. They're all splenic manifestors, and really the motor center that's connected here is the root through the spleen. And in the case of Mao and Hitler, they have the channel of judgment that's connecting to the spleen. But what they all have in common is that, they have the 5720. That's the one that they all have. And the 57, the shadow of the 57 is unease. Yeah, it's actually the 57 is the quintessential splenic gene key or gate. Yeah, and so we find the 57 is really the pure intuition, but at the shadow level, it's a lot of fear. It's a constant unease and really paranoia. And so
I just want to add in. So like this is super deep info, and I want to translate just a little bit of what you shared as we go along sometimes.
Yeah, sure.
So the first thing, like you said, they're all manifestors. And so for some people who are just like a little bit more new to human design, how you can recognize someone as a manifestor is that they have a motor center connected to the throat without the sacral center defined. So you can see the second square from the bottom is white in all of them. And so that's an undefined sacral center. So immediately they're not generators, but they all have the bottom square and the next triangle kind of all connected, giving them a connection from the motor, which is a root center. The root is one of the motors. So there's a number of different motors in the body graph. And that root center is connected through the spleen and into the throat. And so it's the motor connected to the throat that allows the manifestor to speak with kind of impact and initiating action. It's because there's no sacral, there's no tie to the need to respond for the energy to turn on. There's a direct ability to speak and manifest the energy of a motor into the throat. And so they all have that, and they all have that coming through the same channel from the spleen to the throat. And the spleen's really important in this, as we're going to go on to, because it has some certain features. You want to tell us a little bit more about the spleen itself, and then that connection from the spleen to the throat?
Well, the spleen is the center of intuition. The spleen is our oldest awareness center. Really, like most animal forms, well, all animal forms really have at least the spleen as their center. And it's here for like awareness in the now, in the moment. And it's mostly here to signal danger. Yeah, it's mostly here to tell us like, don't do this, don't do that. Or, it's very good at pattern recognition, meaning, if you have an animal which is in nature and it's just, I don't know, eating grass somewhere, and suddenly it hears like a branch cracking somewhere, it knows that there's an animal nearby and it's going to be on high alert. And our overall day-to-day intuition around those things is connected to the spleen. Now, what happens when you have a profile that is so centered on the spleen is you end up with someone who can live with a lot of fears, and sometimes completely irrational fears. Yes, the shadow of the spleen is exactly the state of alert, and you don't want to be. You want to have a sharp intuition, but you don't want to be on alert all the time. And so what's telling us is that we're dealing with very fearful people. And when you have a fearful person who's unable to manifest anything out of that, just too bad for them. They have to live with it. But when you end up with a manifestor, they're literally manifesting from that fear. And so they're able to transform that fear into anger and into, angry outward actions towards the world. And, we've already seen, where that can lead.
And also like and something that I remember you talking about a lot is when we were going through this is the root. The root is the only of the motors that can't connect directly to the throat. Mm-hmm. And there's something incredibly powerful about the root. I remember you telling me about, and it's like really associated with adrenaline. The root is about adrenaline and cortisol and kind of like the energy to act, to do, to get things done, really. And so we have this strong, impulsive like drive for those who have root centers. I have a root center. You too?
Yeah, I have it defined.
Yeah. And I feel that there is an almost relentless drive to do things. There's like this kind of unending impulse to enact. And so we've got this drive that's connecting through the fear center and then being able to manifest. And the manifestor, as you mentioned before, is the theme is anger. So we have this anger manifested through fear. I love it. I love that you've like kind of, it's so evident to see this. And when we pay attention to these particular characters, there is that. It's like the anger of a manifestor is not rage necessarily. Like anger of the manifestor, at least the way that I experience it, it's not some like I'm going to scream and yell at you. It's more like a cold, seething like intensity. There's like I know when people try and tell me what to do, there's an anger. You won't even see that I'm angry, but inside I'm angry. Like there's a like, you don't fucking get to tell me what to do. Like that happens. And so I'm seeing in these particular profiles, the intensity of that through this kind of gate is a lot of pressure. It's a lot of fear-based anger.
Yeah. And coming back to the root for a second, the shadow state of the root is stress. Yeah. And so again, if we think like the primal energy being stress and a drive to do something about that stress, and then we have the fears of the spleen and the hyper alertness of the spleen, and then, connecting to the throat and being manifested out into the world. So it can be a pretty dangerous mix. I want to spend a second on their profile, so on their lines, because the one that's the closest to Putin, and you're going to see that this specific video is focused on Putin because of the recent events. Hitler is the closest to him when we look at those profiles. You can see that he's also a 5-1, both of them being 5-1s. And this and Mao is a 1-3. They all have the first line in common, which is interesting. The first line is also fear, like as the shadow state, the constant fear that your own world is going to collapse and maybe, the need to do something about it. So it's that first line is just increasing the fears of the spleen. But then back to Hitler and Putin, their fifth line, the fifth line, you can have a lot of projections onto you. you can be very misunderstood by the world, either positively or negatively. You know, you definitely have the potential to become a big figure and, you know, have a lot of people ready to consider you like a semi-god. There are still, until today, a very high number of Russians that fully support Putin, that believe that, you know, he is the, you know, rightful leader of the Russian nation, that he is the savior of the Russian nation, and rightly so, by the way, because, you know, just like Hitler, he took a country that was doing very badly, and, you know, it's still not great in Russia, but it's a lot better than 20 years ago or 25 or 30 years ago, right after, you know, because about 30 years ago, the Soviet Union collapsed. And, you know, for the next 10 years, it was a very difficult situation there. And then Putin came along and really did help the economy. Same as Hitler in Germany, you know, he was very highly respected because he did a lot of good things to the economy. And so, you know, those positive projections will have some foundation somewhere. But, you know, it's usually very typical stories of being worshipped and then on the other side being equally hated by other people. It's very rare that someone feels neutral about either of those people. You know, does anybody feel neutral about Putin? You know, usually, unless you're like consciously approaching him, and that's what we're trying to do now, by the way, like just looking at the profile. It's not about our personal opinions. It's not about, you know, how we feel about the situation. It's really just about the profiles themselves, because it's very interesting. Yeah. Same, you know, does anybody feel neutral about Hitler? Usually, you know, still some neo-Nazis that are fans of him, or just people who consider him one of the, you know, most evil people of, you know, the last 500 years, maybe. So that's the story of the fifth line, and it's a very important one as well. And the fifth line can really add the 5-1, especially the 5-1, you know, the first line, which can really live with a lot of insecurities, and the 5-1, which, you know, feels like it always has something to hide. Like it just cannot reveal its weaknesses. It just wants to, you know, look a certain way for the people, and, you know, never break through that wall of projections. And that can really add to the unease, to the fear, to the paranoia. You know, and it's a very, I was talking about it with my wife, Ajna, the other day. She was saying, like, she was looking at videos of Putin, like recent ones, and she was like, you know, I just feel sadness when I look at him. Like, he just feels super lonely. He really, like, he really looks like super isolated and lonely. Like, it doesn't, you know, and I'm like, it makes sense with his profile, you know, and when first of all, you're a manifestor, so you have a closed aura. Yeah.
And I would say, you know, like my own experience as a manifestor, and probably a pretty social manifestor, there is still a very strong experience of being alone, like that, you know. And from my readings of the manifested with that closed aura kind of just feels generally alone somehow. Yeah. And so there's already that tendency for experience there.
And the first line, unconscious. In your
the first
case,
line also is an isolationist.
Yeah, and in your case, you have the fourth line personality. So exactly. You are a very social being, but their fifth line, you know, well, you're, as a fifth line, you are meant to be, you know, somewhat of a leader. And they also, both him and Hitler, as their vocation, but also therefore core wound, they have a fifth line. They both have a fifth line. And so they are also here to be in positions of management and leadership, but at the shadow level, we have tyranny.
Putin, I just noticed there as well, Putin's a fifth line in his IQ and EQ too.
And his SQ.
And his SQ.
Yeah. So
he's, wow.
That's almost the whole Venus sequence in his case is a fifth line.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so, that's very interesting.
And the shadow for both of them is tyranny. You know, like the racial and planetary wound that they spread around and that they're connected to is tyranny and war. Yeah, there is a table that you can find connecting the gene keys, the core wound to the planetary wounds. And in their case, the fifth line, tyranny and war. Well, that's been pretty true so far. Yeah, anything else that you feel like that you see here that we should mention?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think I just want to read have a look at the activation sequences of them, because I'm like quite interested in both Hitler and Putin's there.
Yeah, sure.
And what they reveal about their characters. Like, something I've really been enjoying doing is reading out the shadows in any sequence, and it's like you get a sense of the character and then you read out the gift.
Yeah.
So if we look at Hitler's shadows of his activation sequence, we have chaos, corruption, and corruption. Gene key 50 is not about like a corrupt politician. It's about data corruption. It's about not being able to get a complete picture. And there's something innate to that gene key that's like, it really believes it has the full picture, but it doesn't. It's missing pieces, but it's acting based on that. I have the full, I understand everything that's going on here, but actually it's incomplete.
And that was Hitler's downfall.
Yeah.
Both trying to take England. And what was interesting, and that's something that happens a lot with dictators. People just they end up with just yes men around them who want to make them happy, who want to tell them what they want to hear. And both with the Battle of England, as well as going east to the Soviet Union and trying to take Stalingrad, and in the end they lost. There was poor information going into it, because the army commanders were just giving wrong information. When finally the army commanders would give the information, Hitler would just not want to listen to it, and it's again like, I know better, and so either getting corrupted data or not listening to the data. And both times, it led to its failure, and both of those really led to the end of Hitler.
Yeah, and so we have these two fifth lines, chaos and corruption. And then in the first line, we have fantasy and arrogance, and like, if anything, that like really kind of does sum up his character: chaos, corruption, fantasy, and arrogance. It's like the arrogance to have that level of fantasy, around a corrupt idea of what a human should be. And line 3, gene key 3, sorry, not line 3, gene key 3 is chaos to innovation, right? There's a frequency there of wanting to create something new, but obviously if we're having this corrupt data around what that new thing, and the fantasy, the kind of this idea of the fully Aryan, like absolute perfection of a man, from this like shadow desire to innovate, to create something new, that fifth line, to lead us into this future world where the fantasy of this perfect man exists, and the arrogance to believe that he could do that.
Yeah, and in Hitler, it's interesting because in his profile, when you look at the other channels, he has the channel of the alpha, so a channel of leadership, and arrogance. Arrogance is part of it, the 31. And he also has the 1858, which is the channel of judgment. And in his case, his judgment was, the Jews should not exist anymore, as well as other ethnicities and groups of people. And so, the whole thing was fueled by judgment. And then, this manifested fear and anger, and then backed up by, his channel of leadership. So, it was, plus the whole activation sequence that Damien just talked about, it's a lot of pieces together that led to, like, nothing is by accident. And, you will always find those things in the profile.
Yeah. And so the channel of judgment, I know that one really well, the 1858. There's because it's coming from the root, right? There's this like, the spleen has the need to correct. It's like the shadow of 18 is judgment, right? And there's this and the shadow of the 58 is dissatisfaction. So there's this like dissatisfaction with the way things are and a judgment on it, and this kind of need to correct it with the energy that like I know what should be corrected, and the ability to back that up by the root is there. So there's this almost this pressure to try and correct things. And normally it's a projected channel, right? It has to wait for invitation. But because he's going straight from the 57 to 20, he actually probably doesn't have to wait. He's able to just act on that impulse to correct immediately and just move from it.
Yeah. And you can see that Mao had the same channel of judgment as well. Yeah. And both of them, because Putin, so far at least, hasn't been accused of, mass, killings. Now they've already had thousands of civilians dead, but with Hitler and Mao, we're talking about millions and millions and millions of people.
And I think there's a really different, and I feel like I can see it in the profiles, and imagine we'll keep going into it. There's a difference in the motivation in these two different types. And really that 18 to 58 is a huge piece of that motivating factor, and Putin isn't motivated by that need to correct. Like I can just feel the resonance of that, like feeling into that channel in myself, and like given a lot of power and a kind of a corrupt idea of what should be, it's like there's a desire in me to correct certain parts of the world that I think are just not working very well. Give me a lot of power and have me running out of the shadow frequency. It's like I would be driven by that regardless of what anyone said.
Yeah, I have the 18 as my pro, so I'm very familiar with this energy of judgment. And for sure, you can be quite convinced, that, some things should not exist, some people even should not exist, or, and it can be, it's the gate of correction, and when you think that you're the anointed one, and you're, you should be the one correcting, God's mistakes, which is the case in those dictators, of course it leads to mass murder.
Can you tell just a little bit about the 5720 as well?
Yeah, well, the main thing about the 5720, really, the energy itself is going to be connected to the 57. Yeah, it's really the expression of this unease that's going to the 20. Now at the gift level, it can be amazing because it's simply the ability to communicate in the moment your intuitive impulses. Yeah, so it's not just fear. There's also a beautiful, you can be an extremely present communicator and speaker, and it can lead to something quite charismatic, actually. So it can have gifts to it, but nonetheless at the shadow level, which, we see a lot of here, it's really speech, and not just speech, manifestation fueled by this unease and fueled by paranoia.
Yeah. And the 20s, the gate of the 20 has conviction behind it as well. The gate of the 20 is like a self-assuredness. There's a strength or an ability to speak or be in a way that is recognized and seen as confidence, with the gate 20 as well.
The last things to notice before we move to the next slide is that they all have fully open minds, meaning like open Ajna, open head, as well as, or undefined rather, as well as open or undefined ego. In their case, there's even also the solar plexus, but I mostly really want to focus on the open mind with the head and Ajna, as well as the open ego. And you're going to see in the next slides that they also have all of this in common. I wanted to, less obvious here in, comparing the profiles, but I wanted to put Putin with, Stalin and Kim Jong-un, which have similarities as well in their profiles. First of all, staying with the same train of thought, all open heads, and open egos. We can talk about this.
It's funny that I just one thing that I noticed, I don't know if we need to go into a little bit, but they all have the 11, and the same in the other slide too, except for Mao.
Okay.
That's an interesting observation.
What do you make of it?
I'm not sure, but there's it's almost like the 1156, the channel of the 1156 is a channel that's able to speak in a very captivating way, you know. But then there's this temperaments from the Ajna to the throat, and I wonder like about the 11 being similar in that there's like a captivation of gate 11.
Well, it's the gate of ideas, but if it's
Yeah.
not connected to the throat, they might struggle to share those in a easy way. Let's say we look after at President Zelensky, who has the 56 and not the 11, and it's interesting to see the difference.
Yeah.
This open ajna and open head, you know, when the mind is so open, we have the possibility for someone who's going to become extremely mentally rigid. Of course, at the gift level, you want people with an open mind, but what happens often, you know, I always say, like in a cult, the leader is going to have a fully open mind, and most of the, you know, hardcore followers will also have that open mind. When you have an open, because let's not focus too much on the open head, but really on the open ajna, because the ajna is how we think. And when the ajna is open or undefined, you simply don't have a consistent way of thinking for yourself. And so there's a certain mental insecurity that comes with that, this insecurity of actually not knowing, you know, and I'm talking here on the mental level. And that can lead to wanting to grab on to a certain ideology, to a certain belief system, to, you know, and often external, especially, you know, if you are, you know, a strong profile on, you know, with a lot of influence, you will want to externalize that belief system and have others follow you in that belief system. And so it's really like you're so insecure on the mental level that you just need to hold on to that thing. And I've seen it a lot, like, you know, someone with an open ajna has the potential to be super open-minded, but very often, sadly, it turns out to be very rigid, closed-minded people. You know, when we talk about religious fanatics and terrorists who are ready to blow themselves up for a book that they've read, it's the same thing. You know, it's this open ajna, and so that's a very, very important piece of it. Anything you want to share about that specifically?
Well, I was just following this curiosity about the 11th, right? And so you're talking about the open ajna having the potential to become rigid, right? And I wonder about the 11th gate in relation to that. If the 11th gate was the point of rigidity, right? So the reactive shadow of gene key 11, rooted in denial and anger, turns an inner fantasy into a projection field and tries to manifest it in the world. If the anger were embraced and the deeper fear owned, then the archetypes within us would indeed manifest in the world. And it goes on to say, it's not able to do this generally. But I wonder, like, the strength of the rest of the profile and that gene key 11 and all the other undefined centers, I just wonder about that kind of, again, that anger trying to manifest a fantasy into the world. And yeah, it's just a curiosity that I had there.
Seems pretty on point.
Yeah. Well, it's just interesting that it's one of the consistent gates that all of them have had so far.
Yeah. And the other, you know, point with Stalin is that he is a 5-1, both of them again. So we're just talking about the 5-1. So it's interesting that, you know, the previous dictator of Russia was a 5-1. And, you know, in the case of Stalin, we're again talking about mass murders. You know, he's killed even more people than Hitler in the end, and mostly his own people, which was also something. And what's interesting is that Stalin and Mao have the same core wound. It's the sixth line. And at the shadow level, we have total indifference. Indifference and annihilation, you know, and both of them are known for having killed millions and millions and millions of their own people. You know, Mao didn't kill a lot of, you know, people from other countries. He mostly killed Chinese people, his own people. And it was the same with Stalin. He mostly killed Russian people from the Soviet Union. And so in their case, it was really like indifference playing out, and this ability to just annihilate just millions of people through this indifference, being completely disconnected from it. Back to the open centers, this open ego as well plays a big role, and you're going to see in the next slide, we're comparing Putin with Zelensky. And there's a difference in the ego center, and here, all of them having open egos. It was the same as well for Mao and for Hitler. The ego is your self-worth, and when it's undefined or open, well, you're going to struggle with a consistent sense of self-worth. It just adds to the fuel, it adds to the same fire, and you're constantly wanting to prove yourself to the world, to yourself. You constantly want to find this self-worth somewhere, and this can lead you, at a more simple level, it can lead to people who, become obsessed with competition, who become obsessed with material wealth, with, accumulating certain riches, with getting to a certain status so that they can feel self-worth, all of that. But the lack of self-worth and mental insecurity, those two things are just, fueling this anger of the manifestor and the fear as well of the manifestor. And here, the last thing I just wanted to, the reason I put this profile, because it's 2-4, it's not a manifestor, it's a generator, but it has the 57 connected to the 34, and at the shadow level, this is the channel of violence, actually. And so it's, again, this unease expressed with force, and also the same channel as Putin, the 3254, which is, at the shadow level, greed, but in general, it's a lot of ambition. Yeah, it's wanting to climb, and really, it's also called the channel of respect. So it's wanting respect from the world as well. And so you can see how those connect together. And again, in the case of Kim Jong-un, it's a very spleen-centered profile, just like the others.
Yeah.
And then finally, because this is the current conflict, because I'm like myself, and I'm sure a lot of people were quite surprised to see the response from the Ukrainian leader, Zelensky, the president, as well as the people of Ukraine, who are following this as well. And again, this is not meant to be picking sides or being emotional about it, or this is not the time for it, but really just looking at the profiles, looking at the difference between the two, and understanding why with this profile, he might be, the perfect answer to Putin's dictatorship, the perfect adversary, and why he's not just gonna, surrender easily. So the main, you can see that both of them are very spleen-centered, so in Zelensky, we have someone who knows about the fears of the spleens, who knows about intuition as well. He has the 57 twice, so he knows about unease. But the first difference, is instead of having the 5432, the channel of ambition, he has the channel of struggle, the 2838. It's also called the channel of the fighter. We're talking here about someone who is extremely stubborn, and well, my wife has this channel, my best friend has this channel, I have a lot of people
has this channel.
And
I know it well.
Yeah. Those are people, when you tell them like, do that, they're like, nope, they're going to go do the opposite. And so when Putin comes to him and says like, surrender, and just stop fighting, like, no, I don't think so. And we're going to do exactly the opposite. It's someone who knows how to stay in the fight and who really wouldn't know how to do any otherwise. Yeah, so it's just going to be a natural drive and intuition to stay in the fight for as long as is necessary. And that was the first big surprise, because, if you know a bit his story, he's coming from acting, he was an entertainer, He's not a military person. He was not a political person whatsoever. And people were a bit laughing about him at first being president. And he's showing, to have, great courage. The city of the 38 is honor. Yeah, so we're talking perseverance and honor, and really we can see a lot of bravery in this channel.
And he has it in his radiance too. So it's the 28 especially is a very like strong part that like actually brings him. It's like, I imagine when he's in that challenge, that struggle, it's actually lighting him up. It's actually giving him energy rather than necessarily being something that's exhausting. But it's also interesting that Putin has that gate 28 as well in his vocation. So he has that same, like he's oriented his kind of work in the world or his calling in the world around that kind of stubbornness, that persistence. And I'm gonna look at his activation sequence, the gene keys as well, and we'll kind of like get more of that feeling of tone of what he's actually up to.
Well, the 28 is interesting because at the shadow level, the 28 is the fear of death. And, that means that they both know about it. But in the case of Putin, he doesn't have the 38. And so that perseverance comes from the 38. Yeah. So he only has the 28. And this fear of death at the shadow level, in his case, has been very expressed, in the first of all, he's quite, paranoid, and rightly so, because he's already had 5 assassination attempts done on him, and I mean, he's creating also this environment around him because he's known to have poisoned, assassinated, or imprisoned most of his opposition. So of course you're gonna end up having the same, or at least people trying to do the same to you. But and also with COVID, since COVID, he has been more and more and more isolated. Yeah, he's put himself further and further and further, even from his own people. You have those famous pictures of him at one side of the table, and it's like a 20 meters long table with a few other officials at the end of it. And now really he's doing mostly everything just alone in his office and on a screen, because he wants to be less and less. And I'm sure that now with what's happening, he must be even much more afraid for his life. But the potential of the 28 is this gift of totality in the city of immortality, and really it's like if, and again, like Zelensky has the whole channel. Yeah. And if it's this ability to give all of yourself to something, and in this case to the fight, and really this gift of immortality is not that you're going to be literally immortal. It's just that you will be remembered forever if you give all of yourself. Yeah. So the 28 has the potential to be a very beautiful theme.
Yeah, I think I just want to take a moment and go back to the activation sequence for Putin, based on that. Like, so there's that 28 vocation that we're talking about, but then I also like looking at his, his life's work is 48, which has the shadow of inadequacy. His evolution, where he's moving towards and what's kind of like driving him has the shadow of control, and then at 53 in his radiance is the shadow of immaturity, and the 54 is the shadow of greed. So there's this like inadequacy, control, immaturity, and greed. And you can kind of get the tone of that. Like I think about when I feel into his tone, and sometimes what he might be motivating, even though there's kind of like a strong character on the front, being motivated by these pieces. And the inadequacy is quite an interesting key to look at in the shadow part of it, in the reactive shadow part of it, because I think it describes a lot of kind of that underlying motivation that I think drives Putin, combined with this desire for immortality, this desire to be living forever, is this the reactive nature of the shadow of Gene Key 48, life's work. These are people whose rage does not allow them to admit that they are also afraid, and so they become victims of the system in a different way. These people use their knowledge to manipulate the fear of others while hiding behind the system. They keep their own fear at bay by externalizing it, and they increase the general level of fear by their unscrupulous actions. Such behavior greatly reinforces the shadow frequency. It is because of these people that humanity feels a general paranoia. So,
yeah, that's in his case, you see that being externalized big time. That's something that we keep seeing coming back and back again with him. I'm very familiar with the 48 because I have it in my culture, and
I
so
have it in my purpose. Yeah, I know it too.
I know about this inadequacy. I also see how they're very close, connected in the spleen, the 48 and the 18. And so I also see how the inadequacy fuels the judgment and vice versa. So those two can really, and it fuels really everything else that's in the spleen as well, and in his case, it's just not helping.
Yeah, absolutely.
The main, other difference. So both of them being manifestors, first of all, let's maybe come back to that for a second. The main thing as a manifestor is that you need to learn how to inform. Yeah, and at the shadow level, because the manifestor has this closed aura, it can have a tendency to isolate itself a lot and to forget to truly inform. Yeah, or really in general, like I see like the manifestor's downfall, if it's not worked on, is usually around communication issues. But I've seen, it's interesting because I've seen it in you being a fourth line manifestor, and now I see it in Zelensky. You're a 4-1, Zelensky is a 4-6, but that fourth line of the heart, of community, of the server, wanting to be there for people, it helps a lot with this communication, with this desire to truly inform, to truly involve people. And I see that Putin has been, not so great lately, especially about his informing. It's actually less and less informing and more isolation, or very corrupted data when it comes to, informing. And Zelensky has done a great job, and Ukraine as a whole, really. But he's been doing daily, like twice a day, updates, just video updates, posted on social media, posted on Telegram, for the people of Ukraine, for the people of the world, and just constantly updating on the situation. And it's not like fancy something on TV. It's a very simple recording. It's him, being unshaved, being in his military clothes, obviously being tired, obviously not sleeping much, but nonetheless still updating, and being very heartfelt and as transparent as possible. And it's just interesting to see the difference in tone between the two. Yeah, it's just, you look at them and it's just a very different thing that you see on their faces. And so that's an important piece, their ability to inform and their ability to lead from that place. Interesting thing as well, Zelensky has the channel of the alpha. He has the channel of the leader, so naturally recognized also as a leader by its people, and really stepping into this role big time. You wanted to say something before I move to something?
Well, I just wanted to also mention, like, just to kind of iterate what that means for the manifestor to inform. So not necessarily everyone. So informing for the manifestor is really, it's like an action to reduce friction. So the manifestors, like, one way that I like to think about the manifestors is almost like there's like a stream of life. We're all on the stream of life, right? And the generators, because they're sacral, they're following the current of life. There's like when we're in a social environment, there's a social stream. There's a kind of a current that everyone's on. And the manifestors almost like got the ability to just cut straight through the stream, to walk up from it, to walk through it, to kind of just not actually be buffeted by the stream. Like, they can actually just walk through it at their own way. But it's like when a manifestor doesn't inform, it's like if I don't inform and I walk through the stream, I walk against convention, I create ripples. And if I do it quite strongly, I create waves. And then everyone around is like, they're bumping in their kayaks and on their paddle boards and everything. And they're going, what the fuck, man? Like, take it easy with the waves, and then they get really annoyed and they kind of like push back against it. But when there's an informing, it's like I can cut through really smooth, and everyone's just like, yeah, sure. Like they don't, even though I'm defying social convention, everyone just like kind of shrugs and goes, yeah, that's what he does, you know, like that's not a problem. And then people just know what I'm up to, you know, people know what's happening. There's definitely some places where I need to learn restraint, and I inform too much. Inform before things are properly prepared. But nevertheless, the informing for the manifestor is how it mobilizes action in others. It's how things start occurring, you know. And when I inform correctly and initiate as well, things will start happening. And sometimes they're for the benefit of me, and that's the direction I'm heading. And sometimes they don't have much to do with me at all. It's just a ripple that goes out. Yeah.
And Zelensky has done a really great job of it, you know, every day being like, I'm here, I'm not leaving, nobody's leaving, we're staying in the fight, you know, and letting the whole nation know, you know, like, because there's been fake news on the Russian side, like fake videos of Ukraine surrendering, of the leaders surrendering, you know, of like to try to convince Ukrainian people that it's happening and to stop fighting. But no, you know, they've done a really, really good job. I know that Elon Musk helped to give them a stable internet connection through his satellite, through Starlink, the system, you know, to make sure, because there were being, you know, cyber attacks on Ukrainian internet networks and so on. So it's really been a war of information. Yeah, which is super important, especially for manifestors and with this correct informing. Yeah, it's really about the information, how you communicate to the people through which means, and really not just him, but his whole team and all of Ukrainians have done a super impressive job at taking over social media and just constantly sharing information, sharing those videos, even making very creative videos as well, or text or art, or it doesn't matter. But it's been very impressive to see, you know, this response, and to see the self-organization of the nation. You know, it's really been impressive to see that, like, as an organism in itself, you know, and able to, and that's something that they were already able to do in 2014 with the revolution that happened, and kicking out the president at the time, who was a pro-Russian, pro-Putin, you know, and anti-EU and all of that president, and the people just wanted him out. And, you know, Putin is trying to correct what he considers to be a big mistake. But so it's interesting to see that, you know, and here I think we have really the perfect leader for the situation and for those people. If we continue with his channels, because it's interesting to see from which place are you informing. Yeah, and here we see that there's an informing that's done from the 57. So in the best case, it's an informing that's done with self-assured intuition, but this intuition is very much in the now. It's a moment-to-moment thing, and that might change over time. And here we have an informing that's done from the channel of the alpha. So, you know, from a place of leadership. Of course, there's the potential for arrogance as well in there, but at the gift level, we simply have leadership. But also, you know, we have those two channels going through the ego and then connecting to the throat. From the spleen to the ego, we have the 4426. And this is the channel that gives you the ability to influence and transmit, you know, and really influence the community at large. Yeah, it's a very important one, and it has helped him a lot. You know, the 44 has this gift of teamwork, and the 26 has this gift of artfulness. You know, it's how to use some magic, you know, to influence and have an impact on the community. And then finally, you have this one, the 2145. They usually call it the money channel, but it's really not just about money at all. It's also one of the channels of leadership in a certain way. You know, it's especially the 45 is connected to this king or queen archetype, you know, being able to distribute resources fairly throughout the community or even throughout the whole country at large. The 21, of course, we have the shadow of control, but at the gift level, we have authority, and an authority that is not taken, but given to you. Yeah, and so it's interesting because I see a lot of similarities, but at the same time, simply some gates being different, it gives them a completely different profile. Because you see, for example, Putin has the 21, but he doesn't have the 45. So undefined ego with the 21, that means like completely insecure, no self-worth, and he's going to try to compensate that through the shadow of control. Yeah. Here we have someone who is secure in his self-worth, you know, who has the 26, so, you know, kind of this thing of being the best, and who has the 21, and so who can take on this role of authority without the need to go too much into control. We have, you know, Putin, who has the 44, but who doesn't have the 26, so he doesn't have the full channel. He has the 28, also doesn't have the full channel. And here the opposite here, Zelensky has the 57, but he doesn't have the full channel. So really, like, you know, a few gates different, and we could have ended up with much similar profiles, but here we end up with having, you know, Splenic / ego manifestor, and this ego manifestor piece plus the 731, you know, changes a lot. And so we end up with a lot of forces put together that, you know, make this president, you know, and both of their, you know, they have the same name, you know, and they both are called Vladimir, and, you know, so that's also interesting. And yeah, we end up with maybe potentially, and so far, you know, the perfect response to Putin's war.
One last thing I just came to me, I noticed that every single one of these that we've gone through in this video, they're all single definition. They're all single definition. None of them have a split in their profile, which means they're very self-oriented or self-contained. Like they don't really necessarily need like have the same kind of need to feel other people.
Yeah. And it's it can be a great help and great power, especially as a manifestor.
Yeah, definitely. There's this much more self-contained experience. Really, like, really fascinating exploration to see. To me, it's just interesting just to see something repeat itself, you know, in a familiar pattern, and that we can look at these designs and go, okay, like there's something happening. There's a consistent pattern that's showing up throughout history, you know, in terms of leadership and the control of leadership, and we can actually look at it and see it quite clearly. It just speaks to the possibility of really understanding or knowing self, and knowing and also knowing like the shadow. So a lot of these profiles are all operating through shadow frequencies, and if they started moving into more of the gift, we see probably most of the gift, more so with the way that we've seen Zelensky showing up. But it's like if Putin's profile was operating in gift rather than shadow, you know, like the city of the 48 is wisdom. You know, it's a beautiful city. Wisdom, valor. You know, there's these like powerful expressions that could actually be manifested through these profiles. So it's like, it's not like the profile makes a bad person.
Yeah.
And like that, like we can express our own profile from quite shadow oriented frequencies, or quite enlightened, or increasingly operating from the gift and the benefit. From these beneficial places.
Yeah, it's an important piece to add, you know, because I always make the joke that my mother-in-law has the same profile as Hitler, Putin, and Mao, and especially Hitler and Putin, because she's also a 5-1 root spleen manifestor. But in her case, I believe she has the Yeah, she has the 2145. So she's connected in a different way, but nonetheless, and I see those traits in her as well. But she's done, in terms of her life's work, she's done a great job at using those gifts. Like she's, a school principal, and she's used that strength in a lot of ways in helping a lot of kids. And even, so she's Ukrainian and she's still in Ukraine right now, and she's decided to stay there. And she has like in the basement of her school, she has like something like 100 and like the ability to have like 150 people hiding in there in the basement if needed. It's a very strong profile, and really can be used in all possible ways. Of course, you're always going to find a shadow in everyone. Yeah, of course, it's going to be there. But nonetheless, a profile is always neutral in the sense that it can be used, in the shadow way, or it can be used, in the ways of the gift and do something great with it. And I believe that potential is always there, but it just depends on, which degree of wounding there is in that person. That's really what it is, and how they're able to cope with that wound, or not.
Yeah, and this is true for all of us. Like I quite like what you said there about like use your profile. It's like it brings us into a slightly more transpersonal orientation, where we go like the profile's not me, but it is me. It's like how it was what I'm expressing through into the world, and that's just something to like contemplate into, like to just like leave that. And then the last kind of piece I had around these is like a lot of these profiles, particularly Hitler, the first three that we looked at, Hitler, Putin, and Mao, and even Zelensky. It's like we have like, it's like we call it, we have the profile of a dictator, but it's also, these are leadership oriented profiles. Like, if they're healthily expressed, these are probably people who are going to orient or gravitate towards leadership in some way or another often. Like these are profiles that we're likely going to encounter in leadership, when they do come up in some form or another. And I would love to see healthy expressions of these types of profiles. I wonder what a healthy expression of a 5818 root manifestor would be like. What they could actually bring to the world could be quite magnificent if they were operating more correctly.
I really like giving readings to 5-1s or 5-2s or fifth line profiles, because I sense their power. I sense this leadership quality, but I also sense the need for them to receive proper guidance, on not playing into this projection field, knowing how to be vulnerable and real, and how to be a better leader while doing it. I think more and more we need, because the same people are going to keep getting in power, or the same types of people, let's say, and they need to be guided properly, and so it's definitely, this knowledge should be used more and more on those types of people, for sure.
I love kind of your like, where you go towards is they need to be guided. It's like so projector, like the impulse to want to guide. It's like, it's kind of innate to who you are as a projector. Like, I'd love to have an opportunity to guide like a powerful 5-1 root manifestor. That would be quite an experience,
I mean, for sure. Like, imagine you have the opportunity to guide Putin, like imagine the impact that you can have through that, guiding just one person, that I think really, like, people in positions of leadership are the one that need it the most, and the world really needs them to be properly guided, and that's very often the downfall of those strong profiles. A 5-1 manifestor is this thing of like, you will never tell me what to do, and really not being good even at taking advice at all, and so, which I'm sure you know about, and which is, of course, it's a natural thing, but nonetheless, I see that as their own downfall, and so here we end up with profiles who they're able to create something very big and very strong on their own, and they're usually the ones who destroyed themselves. They created, and I've seen the same also in, I used to be part of a spiritual community that was driven by 5-1 people, you know, and I've seen the rise and I've seen the downfall, and done on their own, you know, like they built it all and they destroyed it all on their own. And I'm starting to see this right now, and I mean, Hitler did it. I'm seeing it more and more with Putin. I'm seeing his mistakes. And it's really, in the end, like, he's the one who will put an end to his own empire, you know. And that's a very interesting piece in this. It's like, if you don't listen, if you don't take the right kind of advice, in the end, it just, you know, those are all qualities that lead to self-destruction.
Yeah. Good spot to kind of wrap up there on.
Yep, we'll continue this series. I'm not sure yet who's going to be next, starting from, you know, we'll try and do those twice a month. And this one was a bit of a special one because we're linking a lot of profiles together. The next ones will probably be shorter and just focused on one person, sometimes couples, but it's going to be, you know, one celebrity at a time. So,
and if you have anyone you'd really love to see the profile done on, we'll drop it. We'll have a link below you that you can submit that.
Or simply in the comments, you know, if you're on YouTube,
the comments too.
If you're on YouTube, if you're on Facebook, just, you know, write in the comment who you'd like to see next, and we'll make sure to take note of it.
Yeah, awesome. Great. Thanks, Fabrice. That was fun.
Thank you. See you next time.